as far as you're concerned, the measurement problem is settled. It's all been set and done, assuming I did not misquote you. But I wanted
Well,
to.
Tim, that was a quote that was offered to me by Tim, but I'm glad to, given the way that I set up the measurement problem, that sounds like a fair thing to say. Yes, that is, there's a question. Um, 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 if you're construing, as I was claiming Bohr did, the measurement problem as some kind of first encounter inside of empirical science with the limits beyond which the scientific imagination cannot penetrate. Okay. Um, yeah, that's been settled. He's wrong. Okay. The problem is not an encounter with the ineffable. It's an ordinary scientific problem, like other ordinary scientific problems. Moreover, we already have a bunch of pretty good looking, candidates for a solution on the table. Okay. So you might say, there was this discussion which I was interested in. Is the measurement problem a straightforwardly scientific problem? Okay. Or is it, or is it something foggier and weirder, or is it merely verbal, or something like that? Yeah, that to my satisfaction, and I think to the satisfaction of everyone who studies the developments over the past 50 years in this subject, has been definitively settled. It's a scientific problem. Okay. It's not a verbal problem. It's not a philosophical problem. It's not a question of interpretation. Okay. It's a scientific problem that's going to be solved by what turns out to be the appropriate sort of modification of the existing scientific theory, a mathematical modification which hopefully, and in most cases so far does, have empirical consequences that we can in principle go out and measure. Yes, that problem has been settled. The question of which one of these modifications to the traditional form of the theory is going to turn out to be the right one, or whether any of the ones proposed so far is going to turn out to be the right one, is still up in the air, as it is with many scientific problems. And we don't know how long that'll last, and we don't know how long it'll take for the dust to settle and for this to be resolved. But a sort of ironic, poignant twist to this story is that the main contributions of philosophers or people who were working from philosophy departments or primarily from philosophy departments over the past 50 years or so to this discussion was precisely to insist, you know what, this is not a philosophical problem. It's a scientific problem. Okay. And the contribution of philosophers was precisely to identify it clearly and unmistakably as a scientific problem.
Yeah, I agree with everything David said, except as usual, one phrase, which is David said at some point, well, we don't know how long it will take for the dust to settle. Where, as I understand, the dust settling is actually getting empirical data that tells you, as it were, what the right solution is. Mm-hmm. But it's certainly possible that the dust will never settle.
Right.
Right. That's, we can't rule that out. There's no reason why we should. You could have two clearly different theories that are both perfectly adequate in themselves, but provably make exactly the same observable predictions.
Right.
So at least you can't, bluntly settle them by doing an experiment.
Right.
But that's not a surprise at all. I mean, the theory that
as you've pointed out, that happens all the time.
It happens all the time. The universe, the theory that the universe began 10 seconds ago in exactly the state that it obtained 10 seconds ago, no further experiment will settle that.
Right.
I happen to think that that's a kind of dumb theory and that you'd be kind of an idiot to believe it, but not because the experiments are against it. So we have experimental things, we have some rational principles. It may be that all of those taken together don't settle it and the dust never settles.
Right.
We should be prepared for that. Okay. We should,
Right.
The world might not be kind to us.
But like you say, that's always been the case in science. That's merely to reinforce the observation that what we've got here is a scientific problem, like other scientific problems. Yes.